I'm going to tell you something right now about Tennessee football, and you can say I'm crazy. And 2 years ago, even maybe a year ago, I would have called myself crazy, but no longer. We're going to talk some recruiting and why the Vols don't have to just rely on cash anymore.
What the? What was he thinking?
Release the hounds.
The Dave Hooker Show.
Keep cool.
A presentation of OffTheHookSports.com.
Caleb and I are spending too much time together because I was going to write about the biggest draw for Tennessee and their recruiting and how it's not NIL anymore. So we'll get to that. First, David Sanders, more news on him. He's Tennessee's huge, monstrous commitment that ranks right up there with the top they've ever had since recruiting rankings began in the late 90s. He's that high. He's the number one offensive tackle in the nation, the number one player in the nation, the number one player in North Carolina. He committed to Tennessee over the weekend. Elite, elite, elite. What did an Ohio State beat reporter have to say about Sanders and his commitment to the University of Tennessee, in which he spurned Ohio State? Guys, if you can really quickly hit that like button, I would greatly appreciate it. Caleb, what do we hear out of Columbus?
Yes, and this is a credible source. This is Jeremy Birmingham, who works for Ohio State's rivals and the podcast OSU, which is a Ohio State insider site. So, I mean, it's not like some random blogger, okay? I think we could safely say you work for rivals. You are tied into recruiting. And he said on his recent podcast that Ohio State was willing to make a big NIL offer to David Sanders. His exact quote was, "They were willing to pay David Sanders, from my understanding, more money than the rest of the offensive line currently makes, or close to it. This was not a money issue. This was a closer to home issue." Unquote.
What does that tell you about Tennessee's recruitment of David Sanders?
It tells me a few things. First off, it tells me that the Carolinas are collapsing. The schools in the Carolinas are collapsing the way Tennessee needs them to. Because if it was about closer to home, he's in Charlotte. And for those of you who don't know, Charlotte, that's very close to Columbia. Not as close to Clemson, but still very close to Columbia, and probably closer to Clemson than Knoxville. And he chose Knoxville for his close to home school. Then there's also Georgia right there, which is impressive about Tennessee's. So there's a culture factor, obviously, because it could have been as close to home going to Georgia as he did going to Tennessee. I mean, I don't know. You may know the differences. Is it 4 or 5 hours between Knoxville or Athens to Charlotte? It can't be that much of a difference in terms of the close to home factor. But
So-
he goes, I'm sorry?
It's about 4 hours to Knoxville. I imagine it would be about 8 to Columbus, but I don't think it's distance. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I didn't say. I was saying Athens because I was saying it's probably only about 4 hours to Athens.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that they're saying it's a closer to home issue. There's a lot of other schools that compete for Tennessee closer to home, if that's a factor. And he chose Tennessee over all of them. That's a huge deal. That shows that Clemson is falling, South Carolina is falling, and Tennessee's got a culture to beat out Georgia if proximity to home was the factor.
Do you mean to give you the number one reason? And I believe this with all my heart. And you have at times made fun of me for using this word, kind of like I've poked fun at you for using the word generational. I think you and I probably both use generational. I mean, Nico could still be like, he could win the Heisman. I don't know, it's generational. But, well, that would be generational. It's culture. Caleb, I'm telling you, and I know it's innate, and I also know a little bit about you, and you've been in work environments where culture wasn't so great. I've been in environments with a 4-letter network that wasn't so great. It's culture, Caleb. I believe that is Tennessee's number one recruiting advantage. When kids show up, when David Sanders showed up, he felt a part of the family early. Now, that's my second factor, early evaluation, because those relationships were built. I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now that, and we wrote about it on Thursday. If you remember a Hooker's Corner, you knew it. I don't think Tennessee was ever in danger of losing David Sanders. I think, as a matter of fact, they encouraged him to look around, look at other places, because there's no way they had the same chemistry offensively at Ohio State, for instance, with Chip Kelly now installing his offense. There's going to be some change there. Basically, I don't know what Tennessee could have done to lose David Sanders. And I would even say this. Let's say Tennessee has a disappointing 8-win season. Well, there are a lot of programs, such as Southern Cal would be one. I think there's a good chance Alabama could slip to that level, that I'm going to try to poach their guys if I'm Tennessee and they slip. I think Tennessee could slip to 8-4 and not affect their recruiting. That's how strongly I feel about the culture they have going on right now.
Yeah, look, I don't want to dismiss the culture, but I don't think culture ever wins out in recruiting. I think there were business reasons too, even for the most sentimental guys like David Sanders, who does want to stay close to home. I think there's the factor that he's looking at Tennessee's roster, and Dave, the dude could start a right tackle by his second year at Tennessee, maybe even his first, honestly, if he wants to.
I was told, and I hate to say this, especially on the line, I was told plug and play guy, that don't be surprised if he plays from day one. Yeah,
and I think that was a selling.
And you've known me for how long? 3 years?
Yeah.
Okay. You've read my stuff for hopefully a long time. And you'll know me for 10, 20 years as we grow this thing to the biggest media agency in the world. But you will never hear me say this guy's a plug and play at left tackle. But I think the plan is to take Lance Hurd, slide him to right tackle, and David Sanders is your left tackle. How insane is that?
No, you're right. That's incredible. And I think you're absolutely right. That's exactly what was selling to Tennessee. Also, culture, there was friendships and relationships. George McIntyre is a friend of his, and George McIntyre was trying to recruit him heavily. You're right. The early identification is part of the culture, to be fair, because they make you feel at home before you're famous and a 5-star. And the other part is, and this is very underrated, that the system. I think the system is a selling point right now to a lot of offensive linemen who are starting to realize, hey, this Darnell Wright guy was a top 10 pick in the draft. And Dave, tackles, Josh Heupel's system, the tackles aren't as important, but they don't make tackles look bad. You ever notice that? It's hard to look bad as a tackle in Josh Heupel's system.
As an offensive tackle?
Yeah.
What do you mean it's hard to look bad? I just think they've been good.
Maybe, but I think a lot of the blocking schemes and things like that make it hard to look bad as a tackle in Heupel's system, because the quarterbacks get rid of the ball so quickly, and it's about blocking, putting a hand on a guy and blocking schemes more than it is maintaining your blocks while a quarterback drops back and goes through his progressions.
Okay, that's fair enough. I want to remind you, portions of the program brought to you by our friends at Medicare Misty. By the way, the poll question as of right now, what team won't make the college football playoff? I went with Jimmy's top 4: Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Texas. You can imagine which one leads, with Lane Kiffin being in charge. Ole Miss, 59%, won't make the playoffs. Alabama at 22%. Texas at 20%. I want to give you another reason why David Sanders picked the University of Tennessee. Portions of the program brought to you by Medicare Misty. And I remind you, she is licensed in 40 states. So wherever you're watching, she can probably take care of you. And there's no charge for her services, Medicare Misty.
19 years this year. Well, I've been in the community since 1993. You're getting a lot of information. Unlike when you were working, they made the choice for you. Now you have to make the choice. Come to us and let us help you make it easy. Call Medicare Misty, MedicareMisty.com or 423-777-5577. Let us help them sleep at night.
And we call her Medicare Misty.
Licensed in over 40 states. Support our sponsors there. That's why we're here. I'll give you another reason. When's the last time, other than Dane Davis, who's the utility guy, that you have seen a tackle move to guard or a guard move to tackle?
Not within this coaching staff,
Right.
but they did move Cade Mays to tackle his senior year when they first took over, when Cade Mays was a guard for Tennessee before that.
Okay, so Cade, very special player. He could play any position he wanted to, right?
Correct.
Yeah, and then the flip side, I would say that you have Dane Davis, who's a utility guy, probably not incredibly great at the positions compared to elite talents, but he is your utility guy. So I think part of the appeal for Sanders, based off conversations I've had, there's no messing around with him. He's not going to show up and be slid to guard, because that's how it used to work. I mean, it used to be theoretically you would go out and get a bunch of 6'5", 300-pound guys, and the ones that had the best feet played tackle. The ones that didn't moved inside. I think there's a definitive plan for each player and how they're going to play in Tennessee's system. Now, we could argue that Josh Heupel, although not playing Nico last year, sticks by that plan a little too strongly. But I think David Sanders knows what he's going to play next year, knows what he's going to play the following year. And there's a plan in place that is far beyond Josh Heupel's years as a head coach. I think he's way ahead of the curve.
Well, and I disagree with you about last year. I think Josh Heupel made the right move sticking with Joe Milton as the starter. But I agree. I think this is, and we're going to talk about this with Tennessee's recruiting method in a little while, but I think that this is why Tennessee is in such good shape. Josh Heupel has, again, I told you guys in 2021, they put together, one of the first things they did when he took over was put together an early evaluation program so they could evaluate players early. They literally are scripting. I mean, down the line, how, when, and who they're going to recruit and where they're going to place them when they get there. And it's funny that Billy Napier is the detail-oriented guy, because, guys, I can tell you right now, Tennessee is way more thoroughly detail-oriented than any program in college football right now. They are detail-oriented from NIL to how they're going to use recruits to when they're going to identify them. They have put a lot of resources, and this is a big thing. They've put a ton of their flush cash into making sure they have a support system that can do all of this. And it was built, you guys remember the whole Butch Jones brick by brick? Oh my gosh. It was like, you heard that all the time. Tennessee, literally within a year, with the way they put their sports staff together, has the most solid brick foundation in college football right now with how they're recruiting and identifying targets.